Hi, I'm Arthur, and this is part 16 in a 20-part series I'm doing covering weird or interesting successor chapters in Order of the Legions. You don't need to have seen the other parts to understand this one, but if you don't, after watching this video, immediately hunt down and watch every other one of those videos, I'm gonna spit up like a baby who doesn't like eating his food all over your keyboard. Through the monitor, no less. This is gonna be weird, because I'm gonna try and cover successor, at least in spirit, to the Sons of Horus, and there aren't really many to pick from, because most of them have already gotten eaten up by the Black Legion, and the ones that exist separate from them are usually just one-sentence background characters that show up to give Abaddon just kind of a boost in authority when he beats them to death. Regardless, the storied history of the Sons of Horus does have a lot of angles to pull from to make a video. So who am I covering today? Well, okay, there isn't really an easy way for me to talk about the Shadow Wolves. It's them, by the way. They are such a weird, obscure, and odd chapter that I can't help but feel that they require a bunch of context to get into. So that's kind of what I'm going to discuss, and then I'm going to go into a bit of a theory piece after this. I want to discuss who the Shadow Wolves are, why are they so unique, and what sets them apart from most, if not all, of their chapters. It's actually kind of a weird meta-narrative thing, but we'll get there, don't worry. But before we do, let's get a quick word from our sponsor. GamerSupps has literally been my lifeblood ever since I got back from Adepticon, to the point where I saw a mosquito explode into fiery chunks the second it tried to give my arm a good ol' suck last night. Kinda wild, actually. It's convenient, affordable, almost impossibly better for you than pretty much any other energy drink on market, and the flavors? I could go on all day about coming in caffeinated and non-caffeinated versions. The average 100 servings tub lasts me well over a couple months, though I'm always back for more, obviously. With some rather, cute characters on the front, you could easily be lured in by their charms, but what if you hate anime? Easy. There's a section on the website for GamerSupps labeled I Hate Anime, and you will be given all the non-anime loving degenerate side of the site. And the best part, my code, BONEZONE, works for everything there too. So if you wanted to support the channel, get some energy sauce, and not endorse big anime, then pick yourself up one of my favorites. Dragon Fruit Punch, or another one that I quite enjoy, which is Blue. And if you've ever been to a sporting event of any kind, Blue will be quite familiar. It's actually all really good. Grab yourself a designless shaker cup, and you're all set. With a bunch of promotions going on all the time, it's never not a good time to log in and grab yourself some sip. As per usual, use my link in the description or use code BONEZONE at checkout for 10% off your purchase of anything on the site. Thanks again to GamerSupps for supporting my channel, and let's get back to it. Okay, that out of the way, let's hop right in. So, this might sound like it has nothing to do with what I want to talk about today, but you're gonna have to trust me. During the story Hell's Reach, written by Baron Dembski, bowed in 1,000 praises upon his name, there is some of the best writing I have ever seen in any Warhammer fiction, or just fiction in general. Which, to be completely fair, it is ADB. The man knows how to write compelling characters. But regardless, there are a lot of one-off mentions to random events across the setting every now and then that are pretty organic to the setting. It's something he does in order to imply the heritage and history of 40k. It makes the setting feel a bit more lived in and real, as they're referencing events that are integral to the setting. So with that being said, he does that so that when you're reading a book, you know that it is a 40k book and not just some random sci-fi. But one of the references made in the book was to a chapter of Space Marines of Dorn's lineage that were wiped out. But for some reason, Grimaldus held quite the fascination and admiration for them. He spoke of them dying heroically as a chapter, and specifically bringing reverence to the fact that even as they died, it was their most fervent desire to make sure their banner was held high as long as one Marine was still alive for their chapter. And thus was actually what happened. In the end, the last Marine died, being torn apart by Tyranids as he held his chapter banner high above his head, an act of defiance that the late arriving Black Templars, Grimaldus included, found to be such an act of heroism and bravery that it inspired Grimaldus far later into his life. So, who was this mighty it's the Shadow Wolves. I'm not gonna bait you. I feel like I'm being a bit too pedantic as is, is without getting straight to my point, but I don't know, I gotta be long-winded anyway. I feel like it would be especially disingenuous if I led you along like that. Though, to be fair, I think it would be kind of funny if I did a bit of a beat switch midway and was like, oh yeah, it was actually the Carcharodons. The title of this is a complete lie, and then just made this into the Carcharodons video. Yeah, I don't know. That's coming, by the way. Don't worry. But yeah, the Shadow Wolves are a successor chapter of the Imperial Fists, with a pretty well-respected reputation, if not a lot of lore behind them. They are a chapter of warrior priests, leaning more to the warrior side of that title than priest, and have a lot of that good old Dorny goodness in them. So let's break them down a little bit more and discuss their unique relationship with the Sons of Horus at the end. Coming from the legacy of Dorn, you'd expect it, but it's still good to say the Shadow Wolves excel in the world of sieging and fortifications, as well as being exceptionally stoic in the face of poor odds. Though to be completely on the level with you, after reading quite a lot of 40k books and quite a lot of Horus Heresy books, when someone says from the lineage of Dorn, it usually has this sort of stigma attached to it, a bit of an albatross ringing around the necks of every single Marine in that chapter, and that is that these f***ing people don't know when to give up. And I don't mean that as like a good thing. I mean, even in the face of 100% certainty that they will lose, they will never admit defeat, and it usually leads to some successors, if not a lot of successors, of the Imperial Fists, instead of packing up shop, regrouping somewhere else, and then mounting a counter-offensive years down the line. They just end up getting wiped out. Name any book with an Imperial Fist chapter homeworld that gets raided by orcs. You know, Rin's World, that entire book series about the beast rising. You know, it happens a lot. But to continue, the Shadow Wolves are especially bound by the Codex Astartes, which is a bit weird for people who are part of the Imperial Fist lineage, as they usually use that for toilet paper, making each of their companies flexible while adhering to the doctrines of the Funny Spaceman book. They have a certain ferocity to them in combat that, although not matching something like a Blood Angel or a Space Wolf, does seem to be a bit up there. Kind of on par with the Black Templars, if not a little bit more beastly, which is why they get their names, the Shadow Wolves. I guess the way to look at them is think the Black Templars if they took a little bit too much pre-workout before the gym. They are especially good melee combatants, thus why the Black Templars had such a reverence for them, as they had a very similar fighting style. We don't truly know where their founding was, but allegedly it was incredibly early on in the history of chapters, as they are stated to have numerous holy relics from the ages of the Great Crusade as well as the Heresy, so probably somewhere around the 3rd to the 5th founding, if I were to hazard a guess. It's really cool to see that. I like early founding chapters because they usually have such a long heritage to them. Though I will say, the majority of what I just said can just be summed up as they're basically just okay at everything with a bit of a melee slant, and also believe the Emperor is a god while following the Codex Astartes. Now, that describes well over 300 other Space Marine chapters. Most of them are from the Imperial Fists, but I'm just laying the groundwork out here because there's something interesting that we're going to switch to later. The defining moment of the Shadow Wolves was that they were absolutely massacred to a man by the Tyranids. A splinter fleet came and began to consume the planet their fortress monastery was located in. They, much like every other Space Marine chapter, fought with the zeal and intensity of a cornered animal, though due to them being Imperial Fists, they, didn't realize that leaving could have been an option early on, but whatever, man. They were eventually aided by the Black Templars, which is usually the thing you want to hear because the Black Templars are basically a mini legion of 5,000 plus Marines that can show up and swarm most issues like a pack of angry ants, if the angry ants in question were a bunch of Space Marines in relic power armor and power weapons. But unfortunately, due to the Shadow Wolves' likely reluctance to admit they needed help, and the Black Templars showing up late, the Shadow Wolves were basically wiped off the face of the setting. It is said that they fought until their armor was shredded, until their bolters were empty, and until their bodies were broken, but they never let their banners drop. A key feature of their chapter's belief, by the way, is survival above all else. Thus why they were protecting their chapter's monastery, as there wasn't really any way to establish more Marines, as their gene seed had been stored there. Grimaldus, having seen all this sacrifice, was moved by their plight. A very survivalist mentality chapter, sacrificing themselves for the future of their chapter, with honor and courage and with curses and litanies on their lips, which is something that he always sought to emulate himself. Fighting waiting for the symbol of your chapter until the bitter end. But with all this out of the way, we have covered the majority of their lore, if not all of it, and a bunch of other little details that are kind of important to them. But I will say, the one that is the most important to me, and the reason why I've always wanted to cover the Shadow Wolves, is the one that we have yet to cover. And I want to go a little bit in depth with this. They are an incredibly unique chapter for the fact that their origins are above the 40k setting. They are a chapter of Marines that were actually created by Aaron Dembski Bowden's wife. Much like all of us could probably relate, getting your significant other into Warhammer is not the easiest thing you could ever do. But ADB's significant other had got into Warhammer by reading the Horus Heresy novels and was 3 books in, as the story goes, then really fell in love with the Luna Wolves, kind of disliking where they ended up becoming the Sons of Horus. She just didn't like it, so they ended up working together and they made a successor chapter called the Shadow Wolves that occupied a similar niche combat-wise and aesthetic-wise to the Sons of Horus, pre-Sons of Horus. And ADB, leveraging his position as a writer for the Black Library, made them a canon chapter in the 40k universe. I do have a lot more to elaborate here, but there is a little break that I want to put in here, just a little tiny intermission, as I want to discuss something and kind of bring a question to you guys that you can ponder on for a little bit. But please, just follow me on this. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm putting this as a little bit of an aside to comment on something ADB has done, while also making it so I can reasonably add the Night Lords tag onto this video. Gotta check that box. But I just wanted to add that Aaron Dembski Bowden, 1,000 praises to his name, has kind of ruined Night Lords for fans. I know that every single person who talks about the Night Lords in any degree of reverence is actually speaking from the perspective of someone who has read the Omnibus. So my question to all of you is, do you honestly think you know the Night Lords? The Night Lords are such a varied faction that I think is represented quite often as mustache-twirling villains, though I should also note, I have not read much of their stuff in the Horus Heresy yet, so maybe it's different then, but I've read a lot of their more modern books, and it all is kind of the same except for the trilogy. I'm doing this so that I can understand this kind of perspective. Curse is interesting, but I think that people forget that there is a lot of very modern interpretations of the Night Lords. Now, the closest we've ever gotten to the ADB style of things is the Death of Saints, and in that book with Morven Fall. But regardless, there is this kind of gaping black hole that I think a lot of people forget. This is literally just a topic that's been floating around my head, and I have no idea how to make it into its own video other than just this little aside here, because I don't want to stretch out this one sentence to just one 10-minute video. I just want to put this in here because we're kind of on the topic. There is a few editions of them that I've been reading in Carcharodon's book recently, and I think that it makes a lot of sense that they're just mustache-twirling villain cowards. They all kind of act the same, and the only reason why I have to bring this up is because the 10th company fellas from the trilogy are just a bunch of non-chaos worshipping wackadoos. But aside from that, I propose a secondary question to you all. Do you think the Night Lords would be as popular if ADB didn't make the trilogy? Or do you think people would still be weird about it on Twitter and Tumblr regardless? Let me know in the comments. Okay, midsection comment, bait, video break, or whatever over. Let's get back to the Shadow Wolves, shall we? Okay, back off my intermission shit again. Let's talk about a topic I think needs to be brought up more often than it actually is, which is, like, never at all. And that is how much power the authors of the Black Library have, and how almost none of them use it in a way that I find interesting. Yeah, look at me, some random nobody YouTuber online talking about people who can actually contribute to society in a meaningful way, and telling them how to do their jobs better. I'll make sure not to trip near any of the ledges on my high tower, but when I say this, I speak from a place of potential and stuff I like seeing, so it's a lot more selfish than just me being pretentious. So, take everything I say with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, they are making the material I am dissecting for all of you, so if they didn't do their job in any way, shape, or form, I wouldn't be able to do mine. So, I have the utmost reverence for all of them, Even Matt Ward, especially Matt Ward. Can't forget Matt Ward. Regardless, let's talk about perspectives in writing. I think I've mentioned this before, but I like the whole idea of the Black Library. A cast of writers writing in the same continuity with the same level of authority, though Guy Haley usually gets contracted for the majority of the mainstay plotlines, but I digress. Like an example I brought up is Graham McNeil's baby, Uriel Ventris, and how Uriel has appeared in a few books written by Guy Haley. Now, I have heard criticisms of both authors, and I do prefer McNeil's writings over Haley, but that's just my own preferences. So, is the Uriel Ventris they are making the same character? Does that character have the same sway on the narrative in the hands of one author than it does the other? The answer is no. A common factor a lot of people forget when it comes to writing is design intent, which is probably not the correct phrase for it, but it's the one that I use. But for what I'm talking about is an old idea when it comes to screenplays. It's that at the absolute maximum, only 50% of what you put down on a page for a character is going to be a part of the interpretation of the viewer or reader in question, because readers will always put in their own biases, their own interpretations, and they will see what they want to see. Does that make either interpretation incorrect? No. But I think therein lies why I am so fascinated by the Shadow Wolves. They are a creation made as a gift to a significant other in the real world that was put into the world of 40K. I think it's actually kind of low-key beautiful that it exists, because in the long run, with the Ultima founding and possibly some other founding after that, there is the possibility that a someone somewhere that isn't Aaron Dembski Bowden is going to write a book about the Shadow Wolves. It's a low chance, very low, as the chapter was wiped out, it likely in an attempt to future-proof the chapter from this happening, but there is still a chance, and I feel the context of them being created as a gift for a loved one will change. But even further, imagine, if you will, that this new version of the Shadow Wolves is presented to someone who in 20 or 30 years becomes an author at the Black Library, and the Shadow Wolves are their favorite chapter. They then diverge from the tree, growing upwards a little further, spanning out. I like this as an idea, though I do know that there are certain written elements that you cannot touch without James Workshop's permission. And sometimes there is a bunch of red tape personally between authors to not touch specific characters as they are that specific author's creation. They kind of hang up this do not touch sign. I think that that's kind of what happened with the wolves, but I could be wrong. That would be just me speculating. I'm just interested in their evolution, or at least their potential evolution. A more obvious way to look at what I'm saying is the man who invented the Space Marine. No, not Rick Priestley, Robert E. Heinlein, the author behind one of the low-key most influential pieces of contemporary sci-fi in history, Starship Troopers. Yeah, the movie with the screaming people shooting at the giant bugs. See, in the books, things were quite different, and I'm not going to go too much into it, but Space Marines and what was likely one of the first, if not the first instance of powered armor were shown there, with the reference in the film of the Marines in the film being called apes, being an actual reference to the bulky Marauder power armor suits that they had back in the book. They resembled giant metal-clad gorillas with guns all over them. These suits of power armor were a lot like the Space Marines from 40K, and thus the inspiration for what Space Marines were in the original printing of the books. That's why when Rick Priestley decided to make Space Marines a thing in his fun little rogue trader game, he decided to take the inspiration from the ones that were in Starship Troopers. So with that, let's push it a little further and say that Rick Priestley's idea about a Space Marine is different from the interpretation that was in Starship Troopers. But even further than that, who's in charge of the modern identity of the Space Marine? It's not Rick Priestley, I would assume. No, his creation has taken on a life of its own, with numerous authors being inspired to discuss and extrapolate on their own ideas. I think even on the small scale, if someone out there decides to make a Shadow Wolves army for themselves on the tabletop, they themselves might not have the context that the army's canonness was based on a gift, and they just chose it because a purple dark wolf aesthetic, which is cool. I think your own takeaway from this idea drift thing that happens is important, because the evolution of ideas once they are in the hands of other people is a concept we see a lot in 40k, as it is a continuity that continues even after an author has passed on from either the Black Library or this mortal shell. I like the idea of new people taking and expanding on old ideas. I know that at some point we will ship of Theseus ourselves, but in a writing continuity, especially with the Black Library and especially with the 40k setting, I don't know if it's fully as grim a fate as the parable of the ship itself would dictate. Now, I know that I posited this earlier, but Black Library authors have a lot of power to do something interesting, and that idea is, well, propose an idea half complete, but tag in another author later down the line to finish it. Now, if an author has a full vision for the story, like say the Night Lord's trilogy with Aaron Dembski Bowden, to drag him back into this conversation kicking and screaming, then stick with it. But what if we did something on a smaller scale to the Horus Heresy, where the story continued in continuity, but with different authors handling the same characters? Then, perhaps something like the Shadow Wolves, or maybe something like Lethe from the Morven Fall books, could have a more expanded story, but in the hands of someone else who might have a different vision. Or perhaps more Carcharodon stuff from their duology. The best example of what I mean is the Clone of Fulgrim. I think it would be so cool if someone was allowed to actually add something to it. Like a new author was allowed to take the Clone of Fulgrim and put something weird into the mix. I know it would screw up the setting quite a lot, but I think that the best ideas are the collaborative ones between great authors. Like, could you imagine if you had the grand scale world building of a setting that was created by Guy Haley, populated by characters written by Aaron Dembski Bowden? Though I suppose I'm getting lost in the weeds here. I think the Shadow Wolves as a chapter are a bit interesting on a conceptual level, but a little bit bland. I wanted to kind of pose these ideas to you guys so that I can see what you think about the idea of idea drift and these concepts of them being shifted and changed over time as a different lens is put on them. I think it's super interesting, and I think that we should pass off work from one author to another, kind of like All Might passing off his quirk to one person at a time. It all depends on the basis that every single author in the Black Library is competent enough to continue a story and not fuck it up. But a Black Library author fucking up? When's that ever happen? That's never, not once, not ever. Name me a no, don't bring up Nick Kime. Don't, no, okay. But yeah. The Shadow Wolves are not much of a chapter, but they are fun. What do you all think of them? As well as, what do you think of this more slow boil intellectual Arbiter Ian if he had brain damage style of video? I kind of liked waxing poetic a bit more than usual, as well as not talking about being horribly depressed when I'm doing so for once. So let me know in the comments what you think about the Shadow Wolves, or really anything in the video. And you know what? Let's do something different. If you got this far in the video, what's your favorite piece of your own headcanon lore? Something that you interpreted that you don't see many other people bring up. Put it in the comments, and if I like one of them more than others, I'll pin it. Special thanks to my channel members for supporting me. With your support, I am able to do this as a job and have fun doing so. So if you want to help keep this content coming and support me in my high tower, then become a channel member today. Thank you once again for watching, and God, I hope this video didn't come off as pretentious. I have a feeling it did, but I mean, it's kind of my brand at this point anyway, so bite me.